I had just inherited $329 million and rushed home to tell my wife. But a serious accident put me in the hospital. To my shock, she never visited. When I called, she said she had no time or money for a loser. Days later, she arrived with her new husband to mock me. But when he saw me, he screamed, "Oh my God, he is my." Look, I'm not the kind of guy who expects miracles. My name's Cameron Blake. I'm 37 years old, and up until that Tuesday morning in March, my biggest life achievement was successfully navigating the self-checkout lane at Target without triggering the unexpected item in bagging area alarm. I'm an accountant, which means I spend my days making Excel spreadsheets look pretty and explaining to grown adults why they can't write off their Netflix subscription as a business expense. By night, I'm a dreamer, which is a fancy way of saying I fall asleep on the couch watching true crime documentaries while my wife ignores me in the bedroom, probably scrolling through TikTok videos of shirtless billionaires doing philanthropy or whatever passes for romance in her algorithmic fantasy world. Melissa and I had been married for 6 years, and somewhere around year 3, I think we both realized we'd made a spectacular mistake, but neither of us had the energy to do anything about it. She thought romance meant forwarding me videos of guys who looked like they were carved out of marble by angry Greek gods, with captions like, "Why can't you be more like this?" Meanwhile, I thought romance meant remembering to buy the fancy coffee creamer she liked, the one that cost more per ounce than premium gasoline. We were living the American dream, folks, 2 people sharing a mortgage, a Netflix password, and absolutely nothing else of substance. That morning started like every other soul-crushing Tuesday. I woke up to my alarm blaring some generic pop song that made me want to throw my phone into the sun, drag myself through a shower that never quite got hot enough, and put on the same gray suit I'd been rotating through my closet since the Obama administration. Melissa was already gone. She worked at some boutique marketing firm downtown where everyone had a title that sounded important but meant absolutely nothing. Senior Brand Experience Coordinator, or some garbage like that. I ate a protein bar that tasted like compressed sadness and headed to my car, fully prepared for another day of fiscal responsibility and mild depression. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let that go straight to voicemail because I'm not an idiot. I know nobody calls anymore unless they're trying to extend my car warranty or inform me I've won a cruise I definitely didn't enter to win. But something made me answer. Maybe it was destiny. Maybe it was stupidity. With me, it's usually a coin toss. Mr. Blake? This is Gregory Thornhill from Thornhill and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Richard Lane. The voice was crisp, professional, the kind of voice that probably charged $400 an hour just to clear its throat. My Uncle Richard. Well, technically he wasn't my uncle. He was my mom's second cousin or something equally distant on the family tree, but he'd always insisted I call him Uncle Richard. He was this eccentric real estate magnate who'd made a fortune buying up properties in neighborhoods right before they got trendy, like he had some kind of crystal ball that told him where the artisanal coffee shops would bloom next. I hadn't seen him in maybe 3 years, not since that weird Thanksgiving where he brought a dates to dinner and spent 2 hours explaining cryptocurrency to my dad, who still thought the cloud was just weather. I'm very sorry to inform you that Mr. Lane passed away last week, Thornhill continued, and I felt that familiar gut punch of grief mixed with guilt because I hadn't even known he was sick. However, he left specific instructions in his will regarding you. Could you come to our office this morning? It's rather time-sensitive. Time-sensitive. Those words always make my accountant brain perk up like a dog hearing a can opener. I told him I'd be there within the hour, called my boss to say I had a family emergency, technically true, and drove to the address he gave me in downtown, to one of those old buildings with marble floors and the kind of elevator that creaks like it's judging your life choices. Thornhill's office smelled like mahogany and old money, with leather furniture that probably cost more than my car and diplomas on the wall from universities I couldn't afford to tour, let alone attend. Thornhill himself looked exactly like his voice sounded, mid-50s, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of guy who probably had his ties custom-made and his shoes polished by someone named Jeeves. He gestured for me to sit in a chair that was somehow both incredibly expensive and deeply uncomfortable, which I guess is the hallmark of wealth. "Mr. Blake, I'll get straight to the point," he said, sliding a folder across his aircraft carrier-sized desk. "Richard Lane's estate has been settled, and you are named as the sole beneficiary of his liquid assets." He paused, and I swear to God, he looked like he'd swallowed a briefcase, like the words he was about to say physically pained him. "The total comes to $329 million. I'm pretty sure my brain short-circuited. $329 million. That's not a number that real people have. That's a number that shows up in news articles about tech moguls or lottery winners or people who invent something stupid that everyone inexplicably needs, like a juicer that costs $400 and connects to Wi-Fi." I just sat there, staring at Thornhill, waiting for him to say, "Just kidding," or for Ashton Kutcher to jump out from behind a bookshelf and tell me I'd been punked. "I understand this is overwhelming," Thornhill said, which was the understatement of the century. Overwhelming? I was having an out-of-body experience. I could see myself sitting in that chair, mouth hanging open like a broken mailbox, probably looking like I'd been hit with a stun gun. "Congratulations, Mr. Blake. You are now the sole beneficiary. We'll need to schedule several meetings to discuss the details, the tax implications, the transfer of assets." I stopped hearing words. My brain was doing backflips, cartwheels, and the entire Cirque du Soleil routine all at once. $329 million. That was goodbye student loans money. That was goodbye job I hate money. That was goodbye eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week money. That was potentially goodbye Melissa money, though that thought felt mean even in my suddenly very wealthy head. I somehow signed papers, I think. Honestly, my hands were shaking so badly, I probably signed my name as Cameron Blake like I was having a seizure, and Thornhill assured me everything would be handled with the utmost discretion and professionalism, which I assumed was rich person code for "don't go buying a yacht tomorrow, you idiot." I walked out of that office, buzzing like I'd swallowed a live electrical socket. My skin felt electric. My thoughts were racing faster than a caffeinated cheetah. I had to tell someone. I had to tell Melissa. Yeah, she'd been distant and weird and obsessed with billionaire TikTok, but this was it. This was the thing that would fix us. No more money stress. No more arguing about whether we could afford to go out to dinner or whether we should just microwave something sad. This was our golden ticket, our reset button, our chance to actually enjoy life instead of just surviving it. I called her immediately, practically jogging to my car in the parking garage. Straight to voicemail. Of course. Typical Melissa, probably in some meeting about optimizing brand synergy or whatever nonsense they talked about at her job. I left a message that probably sounded like a madman. "Mel, call me back immediately. Something huge just happened. Like, life-changing huge. Our ramen for dinner days are officially over. Call me." I jumped into my Tesla. Well, technically it was a base model used Tesla I'd bought 3 years ago that Melissa always complained wasn't as nice as her friend Stephanie's Mercedes, and started driving home. I was picturing her reaction the whole way. Maybe she'd cry happy tears for once instead of the usual frustrated tears when I forgot to unload the dishwasher. Maybe she'd hug me. Actually hug me like she meant it, not like she was hugging a coat rack. Maybe we could finally take that trip to Italy she'd been talking about since our honeymoon, the one we'd never taken because we couldn't afford it. I was still lost in these fantasies, driving through the intersection of 5th and Morrison when I saw the truck. It was one of those massive 18-wheelers, the kind that makes you feel like your car is a toy in comparison. And it was running the red light. I had maybe half a second to process what was happening before it T-boned my Tesla, hitting me right on the driver's side with the force of a meteor strike. The sound was incredible. Metal crunching, glass shattering, airbags exploding in my face like aggressive pillows. My car spun, flipped, and turned into what I would later describe as a metallic burrito, except way less delicious and infinitely more painful. Then everything went dark. Complete silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if you're dead or just having the world's worst nap. And then, from somewhere far away, I heard beeping. Steady, rhythmic beeping that my slowly returning consciousness recognized as the sound that says, "Congrats, buddy, you're alive, but barely." When I finally clawed my way back to consciousness, the first thing I noticed was that everything hurt. Not like, "Oh man, I slept wrong and my neck is sore" hurt, but like a truck literally used me as a speed bump hurt. Every single part of my body was screaming at me in harmony, like some kind of twisted choir performing a symphony of agony. My ribs felt like someone had used them as a xylophone, My left leg was throbbing with a pain that suggested it now contained more metal than actual bone, and my head felt like it had been used as a basketball by a very aggressive NBA player. I tried to open my eyes, but even my eyelids hurt, which I didn't even know was possible. When I finally managed to pry them open, I was greeted by the sterile white ceiling of what was obviously a hospital room, complete with that distinctive smell of antiseptic and despair that all hospitals seem to specialize in. I was wrapped up like a discount mummy, with bandages covering what felt like 70% of my body, tubes coming out of places I didn't want to think about, and a truly impressive collection of machines beeping around me like I was the star of some depressing sci-fi movie. "Oh, good. You're awake," came a warm voice from my right. I turned my head, slowly, because apparently my neck had also joined the pain chorus, to see an older woman in scrubs standing by my bedside. She had kind eyes, the kind that crinkle at the corners, and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her name tag read Beatrice, and she had the sort of calm, seen-it-all demeanor that told me she'd been doing this job for decades and had probably witnessed every possible human disaster, including marriages even worse than mine. "Where am I?" I croaked, my voice sounding like I'd been gargling gravel. My throat was drier than a stand-up comedian's sense of humor after bombing on stage. "St. Mary's Hospital, sweetie," Beatrice said, adjusting one of my 4 bags with practiced efficiency. "You've been out for 3 days, Mr. Blake. You were in a pretty serious accident. A truck ran a red light and hit your car. You're lucky to be alive, honestly. You've got 4 broken ribs, a shattered left femur, which is why you've got enough titanium in your leg now to set off airport metal detectors for the rest of your life. A severe concussion and more bruises than I can count. But you're stable, and you're going to be okay. 3 days. I'd been unconscious for 3 entire days. That meant Melissa must have been losing her mind with worry. My poor wife, probably sitting by my bedside day and night, holding my hand, praying for me to wake up. The thought actually made me feel guilty for all those times I'd thought mean things about her TikTok habits. Maybe this accident would be the thing that brought us back together, reminded us what really mattered. Maybe almost dying was the universe's way of showing us that life was too short to be miserable. My wife. I managed to say, each word feeling like I was pushing a boulder up a hill. "Melissa, is she here? Has she been here?" Beatrice's expression changed in a way that immediately made my stomach drop, which was impressive considering my stomach was already pretty occupied with feeling like it had been through a blender. It was that look, that specific nurse look that they must teach in nursing school, the one that says, "Oh honey, you poor naive idiot, you have no idea what's coming, and I'm about to ruin your entire day, but I'm getting paid hourly, so let's get this over with." "Well," Beatrice said carefully, in that tone people use when they're about to tell you something that's going to hurt worse than the actual physical injuries. "She hasn't called. Not once since you've been here. We tried reaching her multiple times using the emergency contact information in your phone, which survived the crash better than you did, ironically, but she hasn't answered or returned any calls." I felt something inside me crack that had nothing to do with my ribs. Not once. Not even a text. Not even one of those stupid automated messages that says, "Sorry, I can't talk right now." I'd been lying here, tubes coming out of me like some kind of science experiment, machines keeping me alive, and my wife couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone? "Maybe she doesn't know," I said weakly, even though I didn't believe it. "Maybe she didn't get the messages." Beatrice patted my hand gently, which was the universal gesture for "bless your heart, you sweet summer child, you really don't get it yet." "Honey, we left 17 voicemails. We also sent text messages and even tried her email. We got her work number from your phone and called there too. She knows." I stared at the ceiling, trying to process this information while my brain was still foggy from whatever industrial-strength painkillers they had me on. 17 voicemails. She'd ignored 17 voicemails about her husband being in critical condition. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't her phone being off. That was a choice. That was deliberate. That was pretty on brand for Melissa, now that I thought about it, which somehow made it worse. "Can you hand me my phone?" I asked, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd been in a coma too. Maybe she'd been abducted by aliens. Maybe I was still unconscious, and this was all some kind of weird fever dream, and I'd wake up to find her sitting next to me with flowers and apologies. Beatrice hesitated, which should have been my first clue to just let it go, but she eventually handed me my phone. It took me 3 tries to unlock it because my fingers weren't really cooperating with my brain yet. But when I finally got it open, I saw exactly 0 missed calls from Melissa. 0 texts. 0 anything. What I did have was a notification from my credit card company about unusual activity, which seemed less important than the whole "my wife doesn't care if I'm dead" situation, so I ignored it. I called her. My hands were shaking. Partly from the medication, partly from rage, partly from the dawning realization that my marriage had probably been over for a while, and I'd just been too stupid or too comfortable to notice. The phone rang 4 times, and I was about to give up when she finally answered. The first thing I heard was loud music. Like club music. The kind of bass-heavy, lyrics-optional music that people play when they're trying to forget their problems or celebrate something. The kind of music you definitely don't play when your husband is in the hospital fighting for his life. "Cameron, can we not do this right now?" Melissa's voice came through, slightly slurred, definitely annoyed. I'm busy. I'm lying here looking like a mummy in a medical supplies catalog, and she's busy. "I'm in the hospital," I said, my voice cracking embarrassingly. "I was in an accident. I almost died, Melissa. 3 days ago. Did you get the messages?" There was a pause, and for a second, I thought maybe she'd finally show some emotion. Maybe she'd gasp, apologize, say she was on her way. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding and we'd laugh about it later. In that uncomfortable way couples laugh about things that almost destroyed their marriage. "Yeah, well, you always make everything about you, don't you?" she said, and I could practically hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. "It's always Cameron this, Cameron that, Cameron's in the hospital. You know what? I'm done. I don't have the time or the money for a loser anymore. Figure it out yourself." And then she hung up. Just like that. Click. End of conversation. End of marriage. End of any illusion I'd been harboring that she'd ever actually cared about me. I stared at my phone, the screen going dark, my reflection looking back at me in the black glass, bruised, broken, bandaged, and apparently single, though we hadn't quite made that official yet. My heart monitor started beeping faster, louder, more insistent. Beep, beep, beep. Beatrice rushed back in, her face concerned, checking my vitals like I was about to flatline. "You okay, honey? Your heart rate just spiked. What happened?" "Yeah," I said weakly, feeling tears I absolutely did not want to cry starting to burn behind my eyes. "I'm fine. I just realized something." "What's that, sweetie?" "I'm married to a Disney villain," I said. "Like, not even one of the complex ones with a tragic backstory. One of the straight-up evil ones who kicks puppies for fun." Beatrice squeezed my hand, and I saw something in her eyes. Pity mixed with anger, the kind of anger that nurses probably feel when they see good people getting treated like garbage. "Well, Mr. Blake, let me tell you something I've learned in 30 years of nursing. Sometimes the worst injuries aren't the ones we can see on an X-ray. And sometimes, the trash takes itself out. You just rest now. You're going to be okay. Better than okay, eventually." I wanted to believe her, but right then, lying in that hospital bed, abandoned by my wife and held together by stitches and staples and sheer stubbornness, I felt about as far from okay as a person could get. The next 2 days in that hospital bed were a masterclass in existential dread mixed with premium cable television. Beatrice kept checking on me with the kind of regularity that suggested she either genuinely cared or was worried I'd try to escape through a window, which would have been impressive considering I couldn't even make it to the bathroom without assistance and a walker that made me feel approximately 97 years old. The food was exactly what you'd expect from a hospital. Mysterious meat that could have been chicken or turkey or possibly reconstituted cardboard, Jell-O that wobbled with an enthusiasm I couldn't match, and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed using water from the 7th circle of hell. I spent most of my time staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them like some kind of deranged mathematician, trying to figure out where exactly my life had gone off the rails. Was it when I married Melissa? Was it before that? Was I just cosmically unlucky? Or had I somehow manifested this disaster through years of mediocre life choices and settling for less than I deserved? The painkillers weren't helping my philosophical crisis. They just made everything feel floaty and weird, like I was having deep thoughts through a layer of cotton candy. My phone kept buzzing with notifications from my credit card company about unusual charges, but I ignored them because honestly, What was I going to do about it from a hospital bed? Chase down identity thieves while attached to an Ford drip and wearing a gown that showed my entire ass to anyone walking by. I had bigger problems, like the fact that my wife had essentially told me to drop dead, and I'd almost accommodated her request. On the third day of my conscious hospital stay, which would be day 6 total since the accident, Beatrice came in with a look on her face that immediately triggered my fight-or-flight response. Except I couldn't do either because, again, for broken ribs and a leg held together with enough hardware to build a small robot. She was carrying a tablet, which in my experience meant she was about to show me something that would make my day significantly worse. "Mr. Blake," she said, sitting down in the chair next to my bed with the careful deliberation of someone about to deliver bad news. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." "Join the club," I muttered. "The things Cameron doesn't like list is getting pretty long lately. I'm thinking about getting it printed on a banner." She smiled sympathetically, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Your wife did come by. Once. Right after the accident, actually, when you were still in emergency surgery." For a split second, my heart did this stupid hopeful leap, like a golden retriever who still thinks its owner is coming back even after being abandoned at a rest stop. See, she did care. She had come. Maybe she'd just been too traumatized to stay, too scared to see me all broken and bleeding. Maybe. "She came to pick up your wallet and credit cards," Beatrice continued, absolutely demolishing my moment of delusional optimism. "Said she'd keep them safe for you while you were recovering." The room went very quiet. I could hear the machines beeping, could hear someone's TV playing down the hall, could hear the sound of my last shred of faith in humanity crumbling like a stale cookie. "She what? Picked up your wallet and credit cards," Beatrice repeated, and now she was looking at me with that pure, undiluted pity that makes you feel like you're a puppy in one of those Sarah McLachlan commercials. "Told the nurses she was your wife, showed ID, said she'd keep your valuables safe since you wouldn't be needing them. They gave her everything, wallet, credit cards, keys, even your watch." My brain was trying to process this information, but it kept short-circuiting like a laptop that had been dunked in water. "So she came to the hospital where her husband was dying, to rob him?" "I wouldn't put it quite that bluntly," Beatrice said, "but yes, essentially." "And Mr. Blake? Those credit card notifications you've been getting? Let's just say your American Express is living its best life right now. Gucci, steakhouse dinners, a resort spa in Scottsdale, premium wine deliveries. She's having the recovery you deserve." I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes people worry you've finally snapped, the kind that's one step away from crying or screaming or just giving up entirely. She stole from a man in a coma. That's actually impressive in its terribleness. That takes a special kind of person. Most people at least wait until you're dead to start spending your money. At least wait until I'm brain dead. That's just basic manners, right? That's just common human decency. Beatrice handed me the tablet. "I thought you should see this before anyone else tells you. She's been posting on social media." I took the tablet with shaking hands, already knowing this was going to hurt, but unable to stop myself from looking. It was Melissa's Instagram, a platform she updated with the frequency and dedication most people reserve for actual jobs. There she was, looking absolutely radiant in a photo dated 2 days ago, wearing a new designer outfit I definitely couldn't have afforded on my accountant's salary, holding a cocktail that probably cost more than my daily hospital care, with a caption that read, "New beginnings. Sometimes you have to let go of dead weight to truly soar. Living my best life. Hashtag blessed and grateful. Hashtag new chapter. Hashtag treat yourself." Dead weight. She'd called me dead weight while I was literally in the hospital with enough broken bones to fill an anatomy textbook. The comments were all supportive, too. Her friends posting things like, "You deserve this, queen," and "So proud of you for prioritizing yourself," and "He was holding you back anyway." None of them knowing, of course, that her husband was 6 floors up in this very hospital, probably paying for her spa day with the credit card she'd stolen from his unconscious body. I scrolled through more posts. Designer handbags. Expensive dinners. A photo of her getting her nails done with a caption about self-care. Another photo at some trendy rooftop bar with people I didn't recognize, her arm around some guy who looked like he'd walked straight out of a cologne commercial. Square jaw, perfect hair, The kind of smile that probably came with a trust fund and a yacht. Who's that? I asked, pointing to cologne commercial guy, even though part of me really didn't want to know. Beatrice grimaced. I was hoping you wouldn't ask. That's been showing up in her posts a lot the last few days. The nurses have been talking. Apparently, she's been pretty open about having moved on. Her words, not mine. Moved on. In less than a week. While I was unconscious and possibly dying, she'd moved on like I was a Netflix series she'd gotten bored with. I handed the tablet back to Beatrice before I gave in to the urge to throw it across the room, which would have been satisfying for approximately 3 seconds before I remembered that hospital equipment is expensive and I was already going to be paying off medical bills until I died, which at this rate might be soon. My phone buzzed. A text message. From Melissa. I should have ignored it. I should have blocked her number, thrown my phone in the trash, joined a monastery, and given up on technology entirely. But I'm an idiot, so I opened it. The message was short, sweet, and absolutely soul-crushing. Don't call me again. I've moved on. You should too. P.S. Thanks for the credit cards. Consider it compensation for 6 years of wasted time. I read it 3 times, each time hoping the words would magically rearrange themselves into something less horrible, like maybe an autocorrect error or a pocket text or a fever dream. But no, it stayed exactly the same. 6 years of marriage, reduced to a breakup text with a postscript about credit card theft. Moved on. I muttered, staring at the ceiling. What is she, Amazon Prime? 2 days shipping on new relationships. Beatrice squeezed my shoulder. I know this is hard, Mr. Blake, but I've been doing this job for 30 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, you're better off. People who act like this don't suddenly become better humans. She's showing you exactly who she is. Believe her. Oh, I believe her, I said bitterly. I believe she's a sociopath. I believe she's probably been planning this for months. I believe I'm the world's biggest idiot for not seeing it coming. You're not an idiot. You're trusting. There's a difference. Yeah, well, trust gets you a hospital bed and a maxed-out credit card, apparently. I tried calling my sister, Talia, because I needed to hear a friendly voice, someone who might actually give a damn that I'd almost died. She was younger than me by 4 years, married to a guy named Greg who worked in tech, and had the personality of a golden retriever who'd been given too much coffee. The phone rang 6 times before Greg picked up. Cameron, buddy, how's it going? His voice was aggressively cheerful, the kind of cheerful that made me want to reach through the phone and shake him. I'm in the hospital, Greg. I was in a car accident. I almost died. Is Talia there? Oh man, that sucks, dude. She's actually in the middle of this wine and cheese thing with her book club. You know how she gets about her book club. It's like sacred or whatever. Can she call you back? Greg, I'm in the hospital. I think Melissa tried to kill me. He laughed. Actually laughed. Like I'd told him a hilarious dad joke instead of expressing genuine concern about attempted murder. Classic Mel. She's always been a firecracker, that one. I'm sure you guys will work it out, man. You always do. Marriage is work, you know? Gotta put in the effort. Greg. She stole my credit cards while I was in a coma and is currently on a spending spree that would make a real housewife jealous. She's probably just stressed, dude. Women shop when they're stressed. My therapist told me that. Just talk to her, communicate. That's the key to any good relationship. Communication and boundaries and, emotional availability or whatever. Hey, I gotta go. The wine's getting warm. Feel better, buddy. He hung up. I stared at my phone, wondering if everyone in my life had collectively decided to fail me simultaneously, like some kind of coordinated effort to test just how much one person could take before completely losing it. The answer, apparently, was slightly more than 4 broken ribs and grand larceny, but probably not much more than that. Beatrice had been watching this entire exchange with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. Your family seems supportive. That's one word for it, I said. Useless is another. Oblivious might be a third. She patted my hand again. Get some rest, Mr. Blake. Tomorrow's a new day. But I couldn't rest. I just lay there, staring at that ceiling, doing the math in my head. $329 million minus whatever Melissa had spent minus my medical bills minus the cost of a divorce lawyer who could handle grand theft and emotional terrorism. Still a lot of money. Still enough to start over. Still didn't make me feel any less like an idiot who'd almost died while his wife was out shopping. Sleep didn't come easy that night, which was ironic considering I was on enough painkillers to tranquilize a horse. My brain kept replaying everything on an endless loop, like some sadistic director had decided to turn my life into a horror film where the real monster was my own terrible judgment. I kept thinking about that phone call, the one I'd made right after leaving Thornhill's office, when I'd been so stupidly, naively excited about the inheritance. When I still thought Melissa and I were a team. When I still believed in things like loyalty and for better or worse, and all those other lies people tell themselves at weddings. I'd been practically bouncing in my car's seat, phone pressed to my ear, grinning like an idiot who'd just won the lottery, which, technically, I had. Except instead of picking numbers, I'd just had the good fortune of being related to an eccentric real estate mogul who apparently thought I was worth $329 million. Uncle Richard had always liked me, I guess. I'd spent summers working for him in college, doing grunt work at his properties, learning about investments and property management, and how to spot a neighborhood that was about to gentrify. He'd told me once that I had a good head on my shoulders, that I was smart with money, that I'd go far. I'd thought he was just being nice. Turns out he'd meant it literally. Melissa, oh my God, you're not going to believe this. I'd practically shouted into the phone when she finally picked up. I remember I was at a red light, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel, unable to sit still. Uncle Richard. You remember Uncle Richard, right? The real estate guy? He passed away, which is sad, obviously, but Mel, he left us everything. Everything. $329 million. Can you believe that? $329 million. There had been a pause. Not the good kind of pause, like she was too shocked and happy to speak. It was a calculating pause, the kind of pause a predator makes when it's deciding the best way to take down its prey. I should have heard it then, should have recognized it for what it was. But I was too high on my own excitement, too wrapped up in fantasies of what we'd do with all that money. Wait, she'd said slowly, carefully, like she was doing math in her head. Did you say US? Like us? Like you and me? Well, yeah, we're married, I'd said, laughing because it seemed like such an obvious thing. What's mine is yours, right? That's how marriage works. Community property and all that. We're rich, Mel. We're actually legitimately rich. We never have to worry about money again. Another pause. Longer this time. I remember the light had turned green and someone behind me had honked, annoyed at my distraction. Cameron, listen to me very carefully, she'd said, and her voice had gone cold, businesslike, nothing like the wife I thought I knew. Don't tell anyone about this. Not your sister, not your friends, nobody. Do you understand? This stays between us for now. Why? I mean, yeah, sure, but why the secrecy? This is good news. This is the best news we've ever had. Just don't, okay? Come straight home. Don't stop anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. Just come home right now. We need to discuss this properly. We need to make plans. I'd thought she wanted privacy, wanted to celebrate together before the whole world knew about our windfall. I'd thought she was being practical, cautious, smart about it. Now, lying in this hospital bed with machines beeping around me and enough metal in my body to build a small bicycle, I realized she'd wanted plausible deniability. She'd wanted me isolated, wanted to make sure I didn't tell anyone who might interfere with whatever plan was already forming in her sociopathic brain. The truck that hit me, I thought it was an accident. Random bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. But the more I thought about it now, the more things didn't add up. That intersection, I drove through it every day. I knew the light patterns, knew the timing. I'd never seen anyone run that red light before, and I'd been driving that route for 6 years. The truck had come out of nowhere, perfectly timed to hit me right when I'd be most vulnerable, right when I'd be distracted and happy and not paying attention. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm an accountant. I deal in facts and numbers and provable data. But facts were facts. Melissa knew I was coming straight home. Melissa knew my route. I took the same way every single day because I'm a creature of habit and she'd mocked me for it countless times. Melissa had suddenly been very interested in knowing exactly when I'd be home, had insisted I come straight there, had made sure I was on a predictable path. And then there was the matter of her reaction, or lack thereof, when I'd ended up in the hospital. No panic, no fear, no desperate rush to my side. Just cold calculation and an immediate move to secure the money. She'd shown up to collect my wallet and credit cards while I was still in surgery, for God's sake. Who does that? Who shows up to a hospital where their spouse is potentially dying and thinks, you know what I should do right now? Grab their credit cards. Someone who knew I might not make it. Someone who was already planning for that possibility. Someone who'd maybe helped arrange that possibility. I felt sick, and not just from the morphine drip. The truck driver, did she know him? Had she paid him? Was this whole thing orchestrated? Or was I just being paranoid because my brain was scrambled and my trust in humanity had been completely obliterated? I wanted to believe it was paranoia. I wanted to believe that even Melissa, for all her faults and her TikTok obsession and her general terribleness, wouldn't actually try to murder me for money. But then I remembered her voice on that call from the club, how cold it had been, how dismissive. You always make everything about you. That's what she'd said to her husband, who was calling from a hospital bed. That's what she'd said to someone she'd promised to love in sickness and in health. And then there was the Instagram post, letting go of dead weight. She'd written that while I was unconscious, while I was maybe dying. Dead weight. My phone buzzed again. Another text. I almost didn't look, but masochism apparently runs deep because I picked it up anyway. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Blake, this is Detective Sarah Rees with the Metro Police Department. We're investigating your accident and would like to speak with you when you're able. The truck driver fled the scene, and we have some questions about the incident. Please call when you're up to it. The truck driver fled. Of course he did. Because if this was what I thought it was, if Melissa had actually tried to have me killed, then the driver would have been paid to disappear. You don't stick around after attempted murder. You don't wait for the cops to ask questions like, why did you run that red light? Or who paid you to hit this specific car? I should have called the detective immediately. I should have told her everything. The inheritance, Melissa's weird behavior, the suspicious timing, all of it. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the painkillers making me foggy. Maybe it was the fact that I sounded insane even to myself. My wife tried to kill me for $300 million is the kind of thing that gets you referred to psychiatric evaluation, not believed. Maybe it was just that I was tired, so bone-deep tired that the thought of explaining everything to anyone felt impossible. I saved the detective's number. I'd call her tomorrow, or the next day, when my head was clearer and I could articulate my suspicions without sounding like a paranoid lunatic who'd watched too many true crime documentaries. Beatrice came back in for her evening rounds, checking my vitals with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times before. How are you feeling, Mr. Blake? Pain levels. Physically or emotionally? I asked. Because physically I'd say a 7 out of 10, but emotionally I'm hovering somewhere around existential crisis meets rage blackout. She smiled sympathetically. Want me to up your pain meds? Can you prescribe something for stupidity? Because I'm pretty sure that's my main problem here. Terminal stupidity. Fatal levels of being an idiot. You're not stupid, she said firmly. You're trusting. There's nothing wrong with trusting your spouse. That's actually what you're supposed to do in a marriage. The problem isn't you. It's that she violated that trust in the worst possible way. Yeah, well, trust doesn't pay hospital bills, I muttered. Trust doesn't unbreak my ribs. Trust doesn't give me back the 6 years I wasted on someone who apparently saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. Beatrice was quiet for a moment, adjusting my blankets in that motherly way that made me miss my actual mother, who'd passed away 5 years ago and would have absolutely destroyed Melissa if she knew what was happening. Can I tell you something, Mr. Blake? Something I've learned from working in hospitals for 3 decades. Sure, why not? I'm a captive audience. Literally. The worst thing that can happen to a person isn't getting hurt or sick or even dying, she said, looking me straight in the eye. The worst thing is wasting your life with someone who doesn't deserve you. And sometimes it takes something dramatic, something painful and scary and life-changing, to show us who people really are. This accident, maybe it saved your life in more ways than one. I wanted to argue with her, wanted to point out that I'd rather have kept my ribs intact and my leg untitaniumed. Thank you very much. But deep down, underneath all the pain and anger and betrayal, I knew she was right. If that truck hadn't hit me, if I'd made it home that day, what would have happened? Would Melissa have just divorced me immediately and tried to take half? Would she have stuck around long enough to make sure she maximized her take? Would there have been another accident down the line, one I didn't survive? She called me dead weight, I said quietly. On Instagram. while I was unconscious. Then prove her wrong, Beatrice said. You survived a truck hitting you at 40 miles an hour. You survived someone who was supposed to love you treating you like garbage. You're still here, Mr. Blake. That counts for something. That counts for a lot, actually. I nodded, even though moving my head made everything hurt. She was right. I was still here. Broken, betrayed, and bitter as hell, but still here. And I had 329 million reasons to make sure I stayed that way. 3 days later, I was starting to feel almost human again. If human meant a collection of broken parts held together by spite and prescription medication. The swelling in my face had gone down enough that I no longer looked like I'd gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer, though the bruises had evolved into this spectacular rainbow of purple, yellow, and green that made me look like a failed art project. My ribs still screamed every time I breathed, laughed, or existed, and my left leg was essentially a bionic limb at this point. But at least I could sit up without wanting to pass out from the pain. Beatrice had been helping me with physical therapy, which was a generous term for walking 3 feet with a walker while crying internally, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about my recovery. You're lucky, they kept saying, which seemed like a weird word choice for someone who'd been deliberately turned into a human crash test dummy. But I guess compared to being dead, I was winning. The bar for success had gotten remarkably low. I was sitting up in bed, trying to eat some kind of pasta that had the consistency and flavor of wet cardboard, when the door to my room slammed open with enough force to make me jump, which made my ribs explode with pain, which made me curse loud enough that Beatrice probably heard me from the nurse's station down the hall. Melissa strode in like she owned the place, and I hate to admit it, but she looked incredible. She was wearing designer everything. Heels that probably cost more than my hospital stay, a dress that screamed, I spent your money and I'm not sorry, and makeup that was absolutely flawless in that way that takes either professional help or demonic possession. Her hair was done in perfect waves, her nails were freshly manicured, and she had this glow about her that people get when they're either genuinely happy or genuinely terrible human beings. In her case, definitely the latter. But she wasn't alone. Behind her was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement or a legal drama on cable TV. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that was styled in that deliberately messy way that actually takes a lot of effort, a jawline that could cut glass, and a suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. He had that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having experienced real consequences for anything, the kind of swagger that screams, I was born with money and connections, and I've never had to work for anything meaningful in my entire life. Cameron, Melissa said, and her voice was dripping with fake sweetness, like artificial sweetener that gives you cancer. You're looking better. I'm so glad you're recovering. I just stared at her, my mouth full of terrible pasta, unable to process the sheer audacity of this woman showing up at my hospital bed after stealing my credit cards, maxing them out, posting about dead weight on Instagram, and sending me a breakup text that mentioned identity theft in the postscript. The part of my brain that handled social niceties had apparently shut down, leaving only the part that wanted to throw my terrible pasta at her perfect face. Meet Brandon King, she continued, gesturing to cologne commercial guy with a flourish that would have been appropriate for introducing a celebrity or a head of state, not some random dude who'd apparently become relevant to my life in the week I'd been unconscious. My new husband. I choked on the pasta. Actually choked. Started coughing, which made my ribs feel like they were trying to escape my body through my chest cavity. Beatrice appeared from nowhere with water, shooting Melissa a look that could have melted steel, while I tried to not die for the second time this week. Husband? I finally managed to croak out, tears streaming down my face from the coughing. We're not even divorced. We're still married. You can't just. That's not how marriage works. That's illegal. That's bigamy. Oh, we will be divorced, Melissa said with a dismissive wave of her hand, like she was swatting away an annoying fly instead of discussing the legal dissolution of a 6-year marriage. Very soon. Brandon's a corporate attorney. One of the best in the state, actually. He's handling everything. It'll be quick and clean. Brandon stepped forward, pulling out a folder from his leather messenger bag. Because of course he had a leather messenger bag, probably Italian, probably cost more than my car used to be worth before it became a metallic burrito. He had this smirk on his face, The kind of smirk that made me want to hit him despite the fact that I could barely lift my arms above my head without assistance. "Mr. Blake," he said, and his voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that had talked its way out of countless problems and into countless trust funds. "These are the divorce papers. Very straightforward, very simple. We're asking for a 50-50 split of all assets acquired during the marriage, including—" He stopped mid-sentence, just froze completely, like someone had pressed pause on him. His eyes had drifted from the paperwork to the chart hanging at the end of my bed. The one that listed my name, my age, my injuries, and my emergency contact information. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, or maybe worse than a ghost. He looked like he'd seen his entire life imploding in real time. "Oh my God," he whispered, and his hands started shaking so badly the papers were rustling like leaves in a hurricane. He pointed at me with a trembling finger, his perfect composure completely shattered. "Oh my God, you're Cameron Blake. Cameron Blake from Blake Financial Consulting. Cameron Blake, who used to work with Richard Lane." "Yeah," I said, confused about why this was apparently news to him. "Did you not know your new wife's husband's name? That seems like information you should have gotten before committing felony bigamy." Brandon's voice cracked. He turned to look at Melissa with an expression that was equal parts horror and rage. "He's my brother." The room went so silent you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet 3 floors down. Melissa's perfect makeup couldn't hide the confusion spreading across her face. What are you talking about? You don't have a brother. You told me you were an only child." "Half-brother," Brandon said, and he was starting to hyperventilate now, loosening his tie like it was strangling him. "Same father, different mothers. Dad had an affair with Richard Lane's sister 37 years ago. Cameron's mom. We share a father. Harold King. The Harold King. King Industries Harold King." I felt like I was watching a soap opera, except I was somehow both the audience and a main character, which seemed deeply unfair. "Wait, Harold King is my father? Harold King, the tech mogul? Harold King, who I consulted for 15 years ago when his company was going under, and I helped restructure his entire financial system and saved him from bankruptcy? That Harold King." Brandon nodded weakly, looking like he might throw up on his expensive shoes. "He's been looking for you for years. Ever since Mom died and he found out about the affair. He wanted to make amends, wanted to include you in the family, but you changed your name after your mom passed, and we couldn't track you down. Richard kept your location private, said it was what your mother wanted. And now you're married to the woman you just illegally married." I finished, and despite everything, the pain, the betrayal, the absolute insanity of this situation, I started laughing. It hurt my ribs something awful, but I couldn't stop. The universe had just delivered the most perfect cosmic joke in the history of existence. Melissa was looking between us like we'd both lost our minds, which, fair enough, this was insane. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick. You're both in on this together." "Melissa," Brandon said, his voice shaking, "we need to talk. Outside. Right now." "About what? About your made-up brother story? About the fact that you just married the man whose $329 million inheritance I was hired to manage," Brandon practically shouted, his composure completely gone now. "About the fact that you married your sugar daddy's lawyer. About the fact that this man," he pointed at me again, "is my client. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any concept of how illegal this is? How unethical? How completely, catastrophically?" He had to stop talking because he was hyperventilating too much to continue. He bent over, hands on his knees, taking deep breaths like he'd just run a marathon. Melissa just stood there, frozen, her perfect makeup starting to crack around the edges as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Beatrice was leaning against the doorframe, and she caught my eye and mouthed, "You couldn't script this better if you tried." "Oh, I tried," I muttered back, grinning despite the pain. God just decided to direct the sequel. Brandon straightened up, his face red, sweat beading on his forehead despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. "Cameron, listen, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know she was married to you. She told me her husband was some nobody accountant, that she'd been trapped in a loveless marriage, that she wanted out but needed help. She never mentioned your name. She never mentioned Richard Lane. She never mentioned any of this. If I'd known, if I'd had any idea." "Save it," I said, still grinning like a maniac because this was just too perfect, too cosmically ridiculous to be anything but the universe's way of making up for the whole attempted murder by truck thing. You two deserve each other. Really, this is beautiful. This is poetry. This is karma in its purest form. This isn't funny, Cameron, Brandon said desperately. I could lose my license over this. I could be disbarred. The ethics violations alone. Oh, it's funny, I interrupted. It's hilarious. It's the funniest thing that's happened to me all week, and I got hit by a truck, so that's saying something. Melissa finally found her voice. Brandon, tell me he's lying. Tell me this is all some kind of mistake. But Brandon just shook his head, pulling out his phone with trembling hands and pulling up what looked like legal documents. It's all here. Cameron Blake, sole beneficiary of the Richard Lane estate, $329 million, currently in trust pending probate. I've been working on this case for 3 weeks. I've had conference calls about this man's inheritance. I've drafted documents with his name on them. I never connected the dots. I never thought. Well, congratulations, Mel, I said, leaning back against my pillows, enjoying this more than I probably should have given that I was still in significant physical pain. You just hit the family jackpot. Literally. You married 2 brothers. That's got to be some kind of record. Brandon's hands were still shaking so badly, he looked like he was trying to juggle invisible grenades while standing on a tightrope during an earthquake. The expensive leather folder he'd been carrying slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a slap that echoed through the room like a judge's gavel sealing his fate. Papers scattered everywhere, divorce documents, asset declarations, all the legal paperwork he'd so carefully prepared to rob me blind, now spread across the hospital floor like evidence at a crime scene. Which, technically, it kind of was. Melissa, we need to talk, he said again, his voice cracking like a teenager going through puberty. Outside. Right now? This is bad. This is really, really bad. But Melissa wasn't moving. She was just standing there, frozen like someone had hit pause on her brain, staring at me with an expression that was rapidly cycling through confusion, anger, disbelief, and what I was pretty sure was the dawning realization that she'd just spectacularly screwed herself. Her perfect makeup was starting to crack around her eyes, not from tears, because I'm pretty sure Melissa's tear ducts had been surgically removed and replaced with calculating spreadsheets, but from the sheer force of her facial expressions doing gymnastics as she tried to process this information. You're lying, she finally said, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Now she just sounded desperate, like a poker player who'd just realized they'd bet everything on a losing hand. This is some kind of setup. You two planned this. You're trying to trick me. Melissa, Brandon said, and he was practically begging now. I swear on everything I own, I had no idea. None. Zero. I thought your husband was just some random accountant named Cameron. Do you know how common that name is? There are probably 10,000 Camerons in this city alone. How was I supposed to know that your Cameron was the same Cameron whose inheritance I've been managing? You never told me his last name. You just kept calling him my loser husband and showing me his pathetic LinkedIn profile. You looked at my LinkedIn profile? I interrupted, oddly offended by this detail. That's so creepy, man. Also, it's not pathetic. I have 37 connections and 2 endorsements for Microsoft Excel. That's respectable in the accounting community. Brandon ignored me, which was probably fair given that his entire life was currently imploding. She told me you were broke. She said you couldn't even afford to take her to dinner. She said you worked at some tiny firm making $40,000 a year. $42,000, I corrected. And that was before the raise I got last year. 45 now. Well, 45 until I quit, which I'm definitely doing as soon as I can walk without assistance. Because screw that job and screw my boss Jerry who makes me work late every Thursday for no reason. Melissa's eyes were darting between us now, and I could practically see the calculations happening behind them. She was doing the math, trying to figure out if there was any possible way to salvage this situation, any angle she could work, any lie she could tell. I'd seen that look before. Usually right before she convinced me that we really needed to spend money we didn't have on something she absolutely had to have right that second. Brandon, you're a lawyer, she said, and her voice had taken on that manipulative sweetness again, like honey laced with arsenic. Surely there's something we can do. Some loophole. Some way to fix this. Fix this. Brandon let out a laugh that sounded more like a dying animal. Melissa, I'm a corporate attorney who just married his client's wife, while representing said client in a massive estate case. There's no fixing this. This isn't a loophole situation. This is a career-ending ethics violation that will probably be used as a cautionary tale in law schools for the next 50 years situation. Catchy title, I said. I'd read that textbook. Probably has a really entertaining chapter on what not to do. Brandon turned to me, and his eyes were wild now, desperate. Cameron, listen. I know how this looks. I know you probably think I'm the worst person on earth right now, and you'd be justified in thinking that. But I genuinely didn't know. I swear. When Melissa and I met, he paused, seeming to realize that explaining how he'd started an affair with his client's wife wasn't going to help his case. Look, I'm not saying I'm innocent here. I'm not. But I didn't know who you were. I didn't know about your connection to Richard Lane. I didn't know about any of this. Where did you two meet, anyway? I asked, genuinely curious now. I mean, what's the origin story here? Coffee shop? Dating app? Support group for morally bankrupt people? Melissa's face flushed red. That's none of your business. Actually, it kind of is my business, I pointed out. Considering you're still legally married to me and apparently also illegally married to him. I feel like I have a right to know the backstory of my wife's bigamy. We met at a charity gala 3 months ago, Brandon said quietly, and he had the decency to look ashamed. A fundraiser for children's literacy. She was there with her marketing firm. I was there representing my father's company. We started talking, and she told me she was unhappily married, that she wanted out, but didn't know how. 3 months ago, I interrupted, my brain catching up to the timeline. 3 months? So you've been cheating on me for 3 months, Melissa? While we were still living together? While you were still sharing my bed and using my Netflix password and eating the groceries I bought? She had the audacity to roll her eyes. Oh, please. Like you didn't know our marriage was over. We've been miserable for years. I just moved on faster than you did. I didn't move on at all. I thought we were working through things. I stopped myself, realizing how pathetic I sounded. The truth was, I had known things were bad. I'd just been too comfortable, too scared of change, too convinced that this was just what marriage looked like after the honeymoon phase wore off. You know what? Never mind. This is actually perfect. This is the best thing that could have happened. How is this perfect? Melissa shrieked, her composure finally cracking completely. How is any of this perfect? Because now I don't have to feel bad about what I'm about to do, I said calmly. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, which took more effort than it should have because my ribs were still auditioning for a medical textbook on most painful injuries. But I managed. Beatrice, could you call security? I'd like these people removed from my room. Beatrice, who'd been watching this entire scene unfold with the rapt attention of someone watching the season finale of their favorite drama, nodded and reached for the phone on the wall. Absolutely, Mr. Blake. Should I also call the police? Because I'm pretty sure bigamy is a felony. That would be lovely. Thank you, I said pleasantly. Also, could you document that Mrs. Blake? Excuse me, Mrs. Blake King? Miss King Blake? Whatever she's calling herself now, showed up here with forged or fraudulent divorce papers attempting to claim assets she has no legal right to. I feel like that's going to be important later. Brandon's face went from red to white to a sort of grayish green that suggested he was about to revisit his expensive breakfast. Cameron, please. Please don't call the police. I can fix this. I can make this right. I'll withdraw from your case immediately. I'll recommend another firm. You'll face the consequences of your actions like a grown adult. I finished for him. That's what you'll do. Both of you. You know what the funny thing is? And I mean actually funny, not tragic funny like the rest of my week has been. If Melissa had just been honest with me, if she'd just said, Cameron, I want a divorce, I probably would have given her a fair settlement. Not half. She didn't earn half, but something reasonable. But instead, she stole from me while I was unconscious, maxed out my credit cards, posted about me being dead weight on social media, and apparently committed bigamy with my half-brother, who I didn't even know existed until 5 minutes ago. So now she gets nothing. Now she gets to explain to a judge why she thought grand larceny and marriage fraud were good ideas. Security arrived then. 2 large men who looked like they moonlighted as bouncers at clubs where people got into fights over bottle service. Behind them were 2 police officers, because apparently Beatrice had decided to call both, which I appreciated. The officers looked between Brandon in his expensive suit and Melissa in her designer dress, then at me in my hospital bed looking like I'd been used as a crash test dummy, and I could see them putting the pieces together. "Officers," I said, "I'd like to report several crimes. Identity theft, credit card fraud, and bigamy for starters. Also possibly attempted murder, but I'm still gathering evidence on that one." Melissa's eyes went wide. "Attempted murder? Are you insane? I would never." "Really? Because that truck that hit me came out of nowhere right after you told me to come straight home, on a route you knew I took every single day, at a time you knew exactly when I'd be there. The driver fled the scene. Haven't found him yet. Seems suspicious. That's ridiculous. That's paranoid. You're making things up because you're angry." "Maybe," I admitted. "Or maybe the police will investigate and find out I'm right. Either way, I'm sure it'll be an interesting conversation." One of the officers stepped forward, pulling out a notepad. "Mr. Blake, can you walk us through what happened? And ma'am," he turned to Melissa, "I'm going to need to see some identification." Brandon made a move toward the door, but the other officer smoothly blocked his path. "Where are you going, sir?" "I'm a lawyer," Brandon said desperately, which was possibly the worst thing he could have said in that moment. "I know my rights. I don't have to stay here. Actually, if you're involved in the alleged crimes, we'd like you to stick around for some questions," the officer said. "Unless you'd like to make this official and come down to the station." The look on Brandon's face was priceless, pure panic mixed with the realization that all those years of law school and all that expensive education hadn't prepared him for the moment when he became the defendant instead of the attorney. Melissa was frantically digging through her designer purse, probably looking for the fake marriage license or whatever document she thought would save her. I leaned back against my pillows, ignoring the pain in my ribs because the satisfaction I was feeling was better than any painkiller the hospital could provide. "You know what, Melissa? You were right about one thing. Sometimes you do have to let go of dead weight to truly soar. I'm just glad I figured out that you were the dead weight before you could drag me down any further." Beatrice caught my eye and gave me a slow clap. Quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. I grinned at her, and she grinned back, and I realized that somewhere in the middle of this absolute disaster of a week, I'd found an ally. Maybe even a friend. "One more thing, officers," I added, because I was on a roll and my sense of petty revenge was in full gear. "You might want to check the security footage from this hospital from 6 days ago. Specifically, footage of my wife collecting my personal belongings while I was unconscious in surgery. I'm pretty sure stealing from an incapacitated person qualifies as some kind of additional crime. Elder abuse. Vulnerable person abuse. I don't know the legal term, but it's definitely illegal." Melissa's face went pale. Brandon looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And me? I felt better than I had in years. The chaos that followed could have powered an entire season of reality television. The kind where people throw drinks at each other and flip tables while dramatic music plays in the background. Melissa started screaming at Brandon with a volume and intensity that I honestly didn't know she was capable of. Turns out she'd been saving her passion for moments like this instead of wasting it on things like our marriage. Brandon was screaming back, his carefully cultivated lawyer composure completely shattered, revealing the spoiled trust fund kid underneath who'd probably never heard the word no until this exact moment. "You told me he was nobody," Melissa shrieked, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing into Brandon's expensive suit hard enough to leave wrinkles. "You told me this would be easy. You said we'd split his assets and be on a beach in the Bahamas by summer. I told you that when I thought your husband was a broke accountant with nothing to his name." Brandon shot back, his voice hitting pitches that would make dogs bark. "You never mentioned Richard Lane. You never mentioned $300 million. You never mentioned any of this. How was I supposed to know you were married to the one client I specifically cannot have a conflict of interest with? Maybe you should have asked questions before committing felony bigamy." I called out helpfully from my bed because I was thoroughly enjoying this show. Security was trying to separate them, but they were locked in this death spiral of mutual blame and recrimination that was honestly beautiful to watch. Just a suggestion for next time. Do your due diligence. It's basic lawyer stuff, right? One of the police officers, her name tag said Rodriguez, was trying very hard not to laugh while taking notes. The other one, Officer Chun, had given up on maintaining professional composure and was just openly grinning. Even the security guards looked entertained, probably because this was way more interesting than their usual routine of escorting drunk people out of the ER or dealing with visitors who wouldn't leave after hours. "Ma'am, sir, I'm going to need you both to calm down," Rodriguez said, though she didn't sound particularly committed to that request. "We can continue this conversation at the station, or we can handle it here. But either way, you need to lower your voices. This is a hospital." Melissa whirled on her, eyes wild, makeup now completely destroyed by angry tears that were probably more about getting caught than actual remorse. "I want my lawyer. I have rights. You can't just—" "Your lawyer is right there," I pointed out, gesturing at Brandon. "But I don't think he's taking new clients right now. Conflict of interest and all that. Also, he's probably going to need his own lawyer in about 5 minutes, so that's awkward." Brandon pulled out his phone with shaking hands, scrolling frantically. "I need to call my father. I need to— Oh God, Dad is going to kill me. He's going to actually kill me. He's been trying to find you for 15 years, Cameron, and the first time we meet, I've accidentally married your wife and attempted to defraud you out of your inheritance. This is— He didn't finish the sentence because he had to bend over and start breathing into his hands like they teach you in therapy for panic attacks. Part of me felt bad for him. But only a very small part, maybe 5% at most. The other 95% was too busy feeling vindicated and enjoying the absolute poetry of watching my terrible life choices catch up to everyone involved. Wait, I said, a thought occurring to me. Your dad, Harold King, has been looking for me? For 15 years? Why didn't he just hire a private investigator? The man owns half the tech companies on the West Coast. He could have found me in like a day. Brandon straightened up, still looking green but managing to form words again. He tried, multiple times, but Richard Lane blocked every attempt. Told the investigators you'd changed your name after your mother died, that you wanted privacy, that you'd reach out when you were ready. Dad respected that. He thought you hated him for the affair, for leaving your mother. He thought you wanted nothing to do with the King family. I blinked, processing this information. I didn't even know about the affair until literally right now. Mom never told me. I thought my dad was some guy who died before I was born. That's what she always said, died in a car accident when she was pregnant with me. She made me promise never to go looking for him because it would just bring up painful memories. The room went quiet. Even Melissa stopped her dramatic tantrum to stare at me. Brandon looked like he might cry, which would have been awkward for everyone. She lied to protect you, Brandon said softly. Dad was married when he had the affair with your mom. Still is, actually, same woman, my mother, Victoria King. The scandal would have destroyed his company, destroyed our family. Your mother took a settlement and disappeared. Richard Lane helped her start over. Changed your last name to Blake, her maiden name. Kept you hidden. Dad's been eaten up with guilt about it for decades. Well, this is turning into a real soap opera. Officer Chen muttered, still writing everything down. Should I get popcorn? Feel like we're going to be here a while. Beatrice appeared with a chair and sat down, clearly settling in for the long haul. Don't mind me, she said. This is better than my stories. Better than Netflix, honestly. I looked at Brandon, my half-brother, apparently, which was still a concept my brain hadn't fully accepted, and tried to figure out how I felt about all this. Angry? Confused? Weirdly relieved to know I wasn't just some random guy with no family? All of the above? So let me get this straight. My dying mother made me promise never to look for my father, who's actually a billionaire tech mogul who's been looking for me for years. My Uncle Richard kept my location secret to honor my mother's wishes. And you, my half-brother, accidentally married my terrible wife while managing my inheritance from said Uncle Richard. Do I have that right? That's unfortunately accurate, yes, Brandon said miserably. And somewhere in all of this, someone may or may not have tried to murder me with a truck, which happened immediately after I found out about inheriting $329 million. Melissa's head snapped up. I didn't. That wasn't. You can't prove anything. So you're not denying it, just saying I can't prove it, I observed. Interesting legal strategy. Brandon, is that what they teach you in law school? Can't prove it as a defense. Cameron, I had nothing to do with your accident, Melissa said, and her voice had shifted into this pleading, manipulative tone that I recognized from every argument we'd ever had where she was trying to gaslight me into thinking I was the crazy one. I swear, I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry, but I would never try to hurt you. The truck was just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. Bad luck, I repeated flatly. Right. Just like it was bad luck that you showed up at the hospital to collect my wallet while I was in surgery. Just like it was bad luck that you maxed out my credit cards and posted about dead weight on Instagram. Just like it was bad luck that you married another man while I was unconscious. You're just the unluckiest person alive, Melissa. So many unfortunate coincidences. Rodriguez stepped forward, her notepad full. Mr. Blake, you mentioned you have evidence of credit card fraud and identity theft. Do you have documentation of these charges? My phone, I said, pointing to the bedside table. Bank app, credit card app, all of it. She spent approximately $47,000 in 6 days on my American Express alone. There's also my Visa, which she took to about $30,000. Then there's the Instagram posts, which she made while I was unconscious, talking about new beginnings and letting go of dead weight. Beatrice can probably pull up the hospital records showing when she came to collect my belongings while I was in surgery. That's when she got the cards. Beatrice nodded. Already requested those records when you asked me to. They're printing in the administrative office right now. Should be here in about 10 minutes. Security footage too. You're amazing, I told her. Seriously, when I get out of here, I'm buying you a car. What kind of car do you want? Actually, doesn't matter. I'm buying you 3 cars. Pick your favorites. She laughed. I'll settle for a nice thank you card, Mr. Blake. Maybe some chocolates. 3 cars and chocolates, I countered. Final offer. Melissa was pacing now, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor like a countdown timer on a bomb. This is insane. This is all insane. Brandon, do something. You're a lawyer. Fix this. I can't fix this. Brandon exploded, his composure completely gone now, just raw panic and desperation. Don't you understand? I can't represent you. I can't even represent myself in this situation. I've committed ethics violations that will end my career. I've married my client's wife. I've participated in what looks like a coordinated effort to defraud said client. The best case scenario here is I lose my license and avoid jail time. And that's if I cooperate fully with authorities and throw myself on the mercy of the court. So you're abandoning me? Melissa's voice went shrill. After everything? After you promised we'd be together, that we'd have the life we deserved? The life we deserved. I couldn't help myself. Melissa, you thought you deserved a life funded by stealing from your comatose husband. That's not having standards. That's being a cartoon villain. You're literally a cartoon villain. You're like if Cruella de Vil and the evil stepmother from Cinderella had a baby, and that baby grew up to be really good at Instagram. Officer Chin snorted, tried to cover it with a cough, and failed. Rodriguez shot him a look, but couldn't quite hide her own smile. The door opened, and a man walked in who could only be described as extremely important person who definitely has lawyers on speed dial. He was in his 60s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire inheritance, with the kind of presence that makes everyone in a room automatically straighten their posture. He took one look at the scene. Police officers, security guards, his son having a panic attack, a woman in designer clothes crying angry tears, and me in a hospital bed looking like I'd been through a war, and his expression went from confusion to understanding to fury in about 3 seconds. Brandon, he said, and his voice was quiet, controlled, but carried the weight of someone who'd built an empire and wasn't afraid to destroy anyone who threatened it. What have you done? Brandon looked up at his father. Our father, and I swear I saw him age 10 years in that moment. Dad, I can explain. I can. Explain? Explain how you're standing in a hospital room with police officers. Harold King's eyes swept the room and landed on me. He froze. Completely froze, like someone had pressed pause on him. He stared at my face, and I watched something like recognition dawn in his eyes. My God, you look exactly like your mother. Exactly like Sarah. And just like that, the entire room held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. A week later, I checked myself out of St. Mary's Hospital against doctor's orders, multiple nurse recommendations, and Beatrice's very stern lecture about how stubborn men always end up back in the hospital because they don't know how to follow simple instructions like rest and recover. But I had places to be, people to see, and a dramatic entrance to make that couldn't wait for my ribs to fully heal or my leg to stop feeling like it was held together with Elmer's glue and hope. The doctors had fitted me with a walking boot for my left leg and given me a cane that made me look like I was either a distinguished gentleman or a retired mob boss, depending on the angle. My ribs were still taped up under my shirt, and I was on enough pain medication to make everything feel slightly fuzzy around the edges, but I could move. I could walk. And most importantly, I could crash a dinner party. Because here's what I learned in my week of captivity in that hospital room, between visits from police detectives, lawyers who weren't Brandon, and my newly discovered father Harold who'd sat by my bedside for 3 hours crying and apologizing for things that weren't entirely his fault. Melissa's mother, Patricia, was hosting an engagement dinner. An engagement dinner for Melissa and Brandon. At her house in the suburbs, with Brandon's family in attendance, to celebrate their totally legal and not at all fraudulent marriage. The sheer audacity was impressive, really. The wedding, or whatever sham ceremony they'd had, hadn't even been legally processed yet. Melissa was still legally married to me. But Patricia had already sent out invitations on cream-colored cardstock with elegant script, planned a menu that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and invited half the social circle she'd been trying to impress for the last 3 decades. Harold had told me about it during one of his visits, his expression oscillating between fury at his son's stupidity and amusement at the absurdity of the situation. Patricia's been bragging to everyone that her daughter landed a king, he'd said, shaking his head. She has no idea about the inheritance, no idea about you, no idea that her daughter committed multiple felonies. She thinks Brandon's just a successful lawyer who swept Melissa off her feet. And you're still going? I'd asked. Oh, absolutely, Harold had said with a grim smile. Victoria and I wouldn't miss it for the world. We want to see how this plays out. Plus, it'll give us a chance to meet the woman who tried to defraud my son. Both my sons, technically. That's when I decided I was definitely going to. There was something poetic about showing up at my own replacement's engagement dinner, alive and mobile, ready to rain on their parade like a meteorological disaster. Beatrice had tried to talk me out of it, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She wanted to see the fallout as much as I did. So there I was, 1 week post-truck attempted murder, limping up the driveway of Patricia's oversized McMansion in the kind of suburban neighborhood where everyone's lawns are suspiciously perfect and the homeowners association has 17 rules about what color you can paint your mailbox. My cane clicked against the pavement with each step, my ribs protested every breath, and my leg was screaming at me that this was a terrible idea. But my sense of petty revenge was louder than all the pain combined. I could hear the party through the front door, laughter, champagne glasses clinking, that particular buzz of conversation that happens when people are just drunk enough to be loud, but not drunk enough to be sloppy yet. Through the large front window, I could see them all gathered in the dining room. Melissa in a dress that probably cost what I used to make in a month, Brandon looking uncomfortable in a suit that no longer felt like armor, Patricia holding cord at the head of the table like she was hosting a state dinner, and Harold and his wife Victoria sitting there with expressions that suggested they were watching a very entertaining car crash in slow motion. I didn't knock. Knocking would have given them warning, time to prepare, a chance to deny me entry. Instead, I just opened the door. Patricia never locked it during parties, thought it was unwelcoming, or whatever, and walked right in, my cane announcing each step with an authoritative thunk against her expensive hardwood floors. The conversation died like someone had pulled the plug on a speaker. Everyone turned to look at me, and I watched the color drain from Melissa's face so fast I thought she might pass out right there into her lobster bisque. Cameron, Patricia said, her voice uncertain, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. She'd always been nice to me in that superficial way people are nice to their daughter's disappointing choice in husbands. Polite but distant, friendly but always with an undercurrent of, you could do better, Melissa. She had no idea what had happened. No idea about the accident, the inheritance, the fraud, any of it. What are you doing here? I thought you and Melissa had separated. I finished for her, limping further into the room, enjoying the way everyone was staring at me like I was a ghost who'd shown up uninvited to Christmas dinner. Is that what she told you? That we separated? That's interesting terminology for she stole my credit cards while I was unconscious in the hospital after nearly dying in a suspicious truck accident. Patricia blinked. What? Melissa, what is he talking about? But Melissa couldn't speak. She was just sitting there, frozen, her perfect makeup unable to hide the sheer panic in her eyes. Brandon had dropped his fork, and it clattered against his plate with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Harold stood up, and I had to admit, the man had presence. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Cameron Blake. My son. My eldest son, actually, though we've only recently been reunited after 37 years. The gasps around the table were audible. Patricia's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, red wine spreading across the white carpet like a crime scene. Victoria, Harold's wife, was watching the whole thing with the calm amusement of someone who'd been married to a billionaire long enough to know that drama was just part of the package. Your son, Patricia managed to whisper. But that would mean that Melissa married 2 brothers, I said cheerfully, leaning on my cane and thoroughly enjoying every second of this. Well, try to marry. The second marriage isn't legal, obviously, since she's still married to me. But points for ambition, I guess. Really shooting for the stars there, Mel. One of the other guests, some woman I vaguely recognized from Melissa's social media posts, probably one of those friends who comments, "Yas Queen," on every photo, stood up abruptly. I think I should go. This seems like a family matter. Oh no, please stay, I said. This is just getting good. Patricia, you were saying something about toasting new beginnings? I'd love to hear that toast now. Really tie the evening together. Patricia had gone pale. She was looking at Melissa with an expression that was cycling through confusion, horror, and the dawning realization that her daughter had done something catastrophically stupid. Melissa, and what have you done? Nothing. Melissa found her voice, though it came out shrill and desperate. He's lying. He's making this all up because he's bitter about the divorce. What divorce? I pulled my phone out of my pocket, moving carefully because my ribs were not happy about any of this, and pulled up the email from my lawyer. According to this, we're still very much married. No divorce papers have been filed. Although you did try to get Brandon here to draft some fraudulent papers that would have given you half of an inheritance you knew nothing about when we got married. So that's fun. Brandon made a sound like a dying seal. Harold put a hand on his shoulder, whether in comfort or to keep him from bolting, I couldn't tell. Inheritance. Patricia's voice was getting higher with each word. What inheritance? Oh, you didn't tell your mom? I turned to Melissa with mock surprise. I'm shocked. Shocked. You'd think my husband inherited $329 million and then almost died in a suspicious truck accident, and then I stole his credit cards and married his half-brother would be the kind of thing you'd mention to your mother. That feels like important family information. Another guest stood up. Then another. Within 30 seconds, half the table was making excuses about early mornings and prior commitments, practically running for the door. Nobody wants to be present when someone's life spectacularly implodes. Except me, apparently, but I had a personal stake in this implosion. $300 million? Patricia whispered, and I watched her do the same math Melissa had probably done a week ago, calculating what that kind of money meant, what it could buy, how it could change lives. Then I watched her realize that Melissa had fumbled that bag so catastrophically that it would probably become a cautionary tale. Melissa, please tell me you didn't. She absolutely did, I said. Stole from me while I was unconscious, maxed out my credit cards, $47,000 on the Amex alone. Impressive really. Posted about me being dead weight on Instagram. Married another man while still legally my wife, and possibly arranged for a truck to hit me, though we're still investigating that last part. Harold cleared his throat. The police are investigating, yes. The truck driver has been located. He's being quite cooperative with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. Very cooperative, actually. Surprisingly talkative about who hired him and how much they paid. Melissa stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. You're all liars. Every single one of you. This is a setup. This is recorded? Victoria spoke for the first time, her voice smooth and cultured, holding up her phone. Yes, dear, it is. I've been live streaming this entire dinner to our lawyers. They're watching right now. Waving to them. By the way, hello Martin, hello Susan. Hope you're enjoying the show as much as we are. The look on Melissa's face was absolutely priceless. Brandon had put his head in his hands and appeared to be either praying or having an existential crisis. Possibly both. I have a statement I'd like to make, I said. leaning against the wall because standing was getting difficult and my pain meds were starting to wear off. For everyone here, for the lawyers watching, for posterity, and especially for Patricia, who I genuinely feel bad for because she seems like she didn't know her daughter was a criminal. Patricia just stared at me, still in shock, still holding the wine glass she'd reflexively picked up after dropping the first one. I just want to thank my ex-wife, well, soon-to-be ex-wife, once the paperwork goes through, for teaching me 3 very valuable life lessons. I paused for dramatic effect, because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. First, never share your passwords, because someone will absolutely use them to ruin your credit score. Second, always read the fine print, especially on marriage licenses, because apparently some people think "till death do us part" is more of a suggestion than a vow. And third, and most importantly, never, ever marry someone who orders lobster on your birthday and then complains about how you can't afford better restaurants. Someone laughed. One of the remaining guests, quickly stifled but definitely there. Even Harold cracked a smile, though he tried to hide it. "This is ridiculous," Melissa said, but her voice had lost all its power. "You can't just show up here and what? Ruin your engagement dinner? Melissa, you ruined it when you committed multiple felonies." I pushed off from the wall, ready to make my exit because I was getting tired and my body was loudly informing me that I'd overdone it. Enjoy the legal consequences of your actions. I hear orange really isn't anyone's color, but maybe you'll prove me wrong. Harold demanded the truth, and Brandon spilled it faster than a drunk at karaoke night. The kind of confession that comes from someone who realizes their entire life is circling the drain, and the only life raft is honesty, however humiliating. He talked about meeting Melissa at the charity gala, how she'd played the tragic wife card with Oscar-worthy performance, crying about being trapped in a loveless marriage to a nobody accountant who couldn't give her the life she deserved. He confessed to the fake marriage ceremony they'd rushed through in Vegas, thinking they'd just backdate the divorce papers and make it all legal retroactively. He admitted to drafting documents designed to strip me of half my inheritance before I even knew he existed. The whole time, Melissa tried to interrupt, to spin, to manipulate, but Harold shut her down with the kind of authority that comes from decades of running boardrooms and destroying competitors. Patricia just sat there crying into her wine, probably mourning the country club memberships and social standing that were evaporating faster than champagne bubbles. When Brandon finally ran out of confessions, Harold turned to his wife. "Victoria, call Martin. Tell him to drop Brandon from the firm effective immediately. And give me the number for James Chun. He's the best defense attorney in the state. Brandon's going to need him." Then the doorbell rang. 2 police officers stood on the porch with Detective Reeves, the one who'd been investigating my accident. The truck driver had talked. Apparently $40,000 was enough to run a red light and commit vehicular assault, but not enough to keep quiet when facing 20 years for attempted murder. Melissa was escorted out in handcuffs, still protesting, still denying, still convinced she could talk her way out of objective reality. Brandon went voluntarily, at least having the decency to look destroyed. 6 months later, I walked into court, cane in hand, suit sharp, mood immaculate. Melissa and Brandon sat side by side, awkwardly close like contestants on a reality show nobody wanted to watch. The trial had been everything I'd hoped for. Dramatic testimony, damning evidence, and a prosecutor who treated this case like her personal mission from God. The judge read the verdict: guilty on all counts. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and for Melissa specifically, solicitation of attempted murder. Brandon's legal license, revoked. Melissa's freedom, revoked for the next 15 years. My sanity, finally restored. "Mr. Blake, would you like to make a statement?" the judge asked. I stood carefully, still healing but stronger every day. "Yes, Your Honor. I just want to thank my ex-wife for teaching me 3 things. Never share your passwords. Always read the fine print. And never marry someone who orders lobster on your birthday, then complains you can't afford better restaurants." The courtroom laughed. Even the judge cracked a grin. Now I live quietly on coastal property with a golden retriever named Murphy and a security system I call revenge. People ask if I'll remarry. Maybe, I say. But next time, she's signing a prenup before dessert.